Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Your Author program. My name is Joanna Fabicon, Acting Associate Director of Youth Services, and I am here today with my colleague, Danielle Dyer, Children's Librarian at the Venice branch of the Los Angeles Public Library.
It is our pleasure to host the Your Author series today. Please feel free to use the chat box to communicate your thoughts, comments, and questions throughout the program. We will be answering your questions at the end of the program. Also, don't forget to email ecdept@lapl.org to be entered into an opportunity drawing to win a copy of today's book, The Circus at the End of the Sea by Lori Snyder.
So today's Your Author program, author Lori Snyder will discuss her middle grade fantasy, Circus at the End of the Sea, which is her love letter to Venice, California. A Los Angeles native and huge fan of the Los Angeles Public Library, Lori has had many careers in her life. Sadly, none of them circus related, but these careers include marine biologist, fourth grade teacher, dancer, yoga teacher, business owner, book editor, and writer. She is also the founder of Writers' Happiness Movement, which offers free retreats, yoga, salons, microgrants, and more to writers.
We want to thank our generous donors, the Lenore S and Bernard A. Greenberg Fund and the Library Foundation for helping the library bring these amazing author and illustrator events. Now, the moment we've all been waiting for. Welcome, Lori.
Hello. Hey, Joanna. Hi, Danielle. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me.
Hi. Thank you so much, Lori, for taking the time to be with us today. It's wonderful to have you here so we can get to know more about you, your creative process, and your work with Circus at the End of the Sea. But first, we would love to hear a few pages of your story. Can you share?
I would love it. Oh, so of course, first, I'm going to read.
The hat.
You need the hat. The hat is required from reading from the book.
Absolutely.
And so, yes. So I'm going to read a little piece. The main character, Maddie, in this book has just followed what looks like a very magical cat into Venice, California, where she finds herself. And she has heard drums in the distance, which for any of you who know Venice, California, like Danielle, who's at the Venice Library, is the drum circle. And she has skateboarded on her trusty skateboard down the boardwalk to where the drums are. And this is when she arrives and what happens. Now Maddie could see the drum circle on the sand, the drummers themselves hidden by a huge dancing, swaying crowd. She came to a rolling stop, grabbed her board, and hurried across the beach toward them. Soft, hot sand squished into her flip-flops and oozed between her toes. At the edge of the drum circle, the sound was deafening and wonderful. Maddie wanted to see the drummers, to watch how they were making the rhythm happen. Doing her best not to bump into any of the dancing, sun-warmed bodies, she snaked her way through the crowd, the smell of sunblock and sweat stinging her nose. She squeezed between two people in sarongs and bikini tops, and then she was there, near the drummers at the center. At least 20 of them strutted and played. Some had drums held in straps that went over their backs or across their shoulders. Some had drums they hit from both sides. Some made their drums sound like talking. The breeze picked up the rhythm and flung it through the air, weaving it together like a perfect Maddie-sized hammock where she could rest. It was the most glorious thing she had ever heard. Maddie set her skateboard on the sand, tapping her leg to keep time and singing along under her breath. The beat ebbed and flowed, now loud and now soft, fast to slow to fast again. It was as though someone had reached into her heart and pulled out exactly how she felt, the longing and wonder and worry and magic, and put it all into a rhythm. One of the drummers caught her eye and dipped his head at her, and Maddie smiled back. It lasted only a split second. The drummer saw someone he knew and turned his attention elsewhere, yelling, "Yo, Skeeter Chen!" But it left Maddie feeling warm and welcome. She followed the drummer's gaze to see a boy about her own age who yelled back, "Yo, Anthony M!" Like her, the boy, Skeeter Chen, Maddie guessed, had a skateboard. Unlike her, he held his board by one hand so it dangled at his side in a stance of careless cool. In fact, this boy was all skater boy cool, from his black clothing to his short, spiked black hair. Kids who looked like that, like they knew exactly who they were and where they belonged, made Maddie a little nervous. Just then, though, the boy noticed Maddie looking at him and flashed her a grin, his whole face becoming friendly and open. Maddie flushed, then shyly smiled back. The drummers played a complicated little riff, like 10 rhythms all at once piled on top of each other, and Maddie's attention snapped away from the cool skater boy and back to the drummers. The one who had nodded at her seemed to be the leader, and his hands moved in a precise rhythm, never stopping. Sometimes he would yell out a formless word and play a short, fast beat, dot, da, dot, dot, da, dot, dot, da, and then everyone would change rhythm all at the same time. Maddie could tell it was coming when his arms, muscled and coated with a thin sheen of sweat, would bunch up. She kept her eyes on him, trying to find the secret that told everyone what rhythm he wanted to play. If she hadn't been watching so closely, she might not have noticed when he raised one calloused hand and tossed a handful of sand into the air. The rhythm rose. Someone shouted. Someone else blew a whistle, shrilly, 3 times. The sand he had thrown was snaking through the air, forming the vague, glimmering outline of a person, then 2 people, then 5, then 7. Maddie drew in a quick breath and rose to her tiptoes, her hand on her bracelet. Slowly, the 7 outlines filled in to become 7 people, all just a little older than Maddie. At first, they were shimmery and translucent, but then they became solid. Their skin was lightly striped, the color of the ocean at night, and their hair, the same steely blue, but with more of a silvery sheen, cascaded over their muscular shoulders in twists that reminded Maddie of sea serpents. Their eyes shone dark brown and aqua, wet rock gray and deep teal. When the sunlight caught their striped skin, Maddie could just make out fine, silvery scales. And then they began to dance. Their feet touched down lightly on the heads of the drummers, their movements sinewy and fluid, arms flung wide and graceful as they moved through the air like eels. They found each beat and tangled it into something syncopated and gorgeous before freeing it to meet itself on the other side. Then slowly, and with excruciating beauty, they started to slide their bodies into shapes so impossible, so completely boneless and astonishing that Maddie couldn't help but cry out in delight. Each one was more flexible and each pose more unimaginable than the last. Maddie tore her eyes from the dancers and glanced around. Could anyone else see this? Her eyes locked with the skater boys across the circle, and his grin grew wider. Right? His grin seemed to say, "It's amazing." One of the sand dancers put her hands on the lead drummer's shoulders and lifted up into a handstand above him, her back curving into the shape of a crescent moon until her legs extended by her ears, practically resting on her shoulders with her toes pointed out in front of her. Then another dancer leaped up, his hands on the first girl's shoulders, and gracefully took the same pose, and then another and another, until all 7 of them were stacked into a tower of curved spines and scales, shimmery hair and sunlight, all balanced on the lead drummer's shoulders as he played. Silhouetted against the sunlight, the dancer on the top shifted all her weight to one arm, extended the other arm out to her side, and straightened her legs into the splits. She opened her mouth and grinned. Row upon row of sharp teeth like a shark's lined her jaws.
So
now we have the dreaded hat hair.
I was
beautiful.
reading along. What a treat to be able to see these words right within your voice. And I don't know, you absolutely just brought Venice to life. Like, as even when I was reading and hearing along, I'm like, oh yeah, that's Venice.
Thank you.
So yeah, now we'll go into more questions about your creative process. And then I just wanted to repeat the comments so far from our administration. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to put them in the comments and we will incorporate them as best we can or put them towards the end of our program.
So, Lori, let us know, like, if there were any, what were some of the challenges that you faced getting your work published?
Well, that is an excellent question because there were a lot. So this was not something that happened quickly or easily for me at all. Um, I wasn't somebody who wanted to be a writer when I was younger. I loved writing, but I loved a bunch of other things. As you can probably tell from my very long list of careers, there are many, many things I think are fun and interesting. So I wasn't until I was in probably about my late 20s where I decided I wanted to write seriously. And I started writing specifically for kids in the late 90s, somewhere around there. And this particular book, I think this is maybe my third or fourth book I actually wrote, and the first one that actually I found an agent for and got a book deal for. And so it was a long process for me. It was a long process of writing in every moment I could find, because I always worked full time or had my own businesses, and or sometimes worked full time and gone to school full time or whatever that was. And so finding the little snippets of time to write and to work on it, and then finishing a book and polishing a book and having that one not go anywhere, and then starting the next book and doing the same. What I will say about this book is when I started working on this book, I'm like, this is the book. I finally have learned enough. I can write a book that I love, that other people will love, that I finally, I think, gotten to the point of my craft and what I'm trying to say, and also really the point of my life where I could put the philosophy that I wanted to have in a book and have it actually make sense in the story. Whereas before, I probably just wasn't quite there yet. So it took a long time.
It is a long process, from what I hear.
It is a long process. I will tell you too, from the time, so I finished this book in 2015. I found an agent in late 2015, early 2016. We did revisions for the book. The book went on submission to editors. It took 3 years and another revision or two to sell. It sold in February of 2020. It just came out late last year, so a couple months ago. So just to give you an idea of like the not everyone takes that long. That was just my journey. But I will say to anyone listening here who is doing something that is challenging, that is taking longer than you think, don't give up. Just keep going. If you love it, keep going. It's going to happen.
Thank you. I wanted to know, how has the Venice community responded to the book? And have you seen a difference in the old Venice, like counterculture Venice, versus new tech industry Venice?
So to be totally honest, I don't have a lot of interaction with the newer Venice. I just been there long enough that I mostly know the old Venice. But people so far have been fantastic. I'm part of the Venice Chamber of Commerce. They have been amazing and supportive. Besides buying books themselves, they keep recommending things for me to do or sending me places or those kinds of things. I partnered with Small World Books on the Venice Boardwalk for my pre-order, or my pre-order campaign, which means ordering the book before it comes out. And it was one of my longtime dreams to partner with them. So that was fantastic. And other than that, because the book's only been out for a couple months, I'm just starting to sort of get the word out around Venice. So my hope is to just really let the Venice community know it's here. I mean, it's a magical Venice book from a local author, and I'm expecting, everyone's been delightful. I'm expecting people just to continue to be so.
So you mentioned earlier about writing for the younger audience. I was just wondering, is there someone you think about, or the specific target audience or person, when you're writing your characters?
I honestly always think about me at age 10. I write the book I would have wanted at age 10. With Circus, particularly, when I sat down to write it, I thought to myself, I'm not going to write anything that doesn't delight me. If I write it and it doesn't delight me, it goes. And that was really my guiding post for this book. And mostly, I think that I mean, kids can read at such a higher level than we often think they can. And so the kinds of books I tend to love are books that sort of slide in between age levels and you're not really sure where exactly they fit. And so I think when I write, that's just how I write naturally. And that's how I read when I was that age. I read far too many things that were far too old for me, and also things that people might have considered to be younger. And so when I write, I kind of think about that kid. I think about the kid who maybe maybe the vocabulary in the book is challenging, but they love that and they think words are amazing and they want to learn about them, or the child who just likes great adventure stories. But really, I write to delight myself mostly.
Lori, there are so many recognizable landmarks in this story. I mean, the canals, the graffiti cones, the ballerina clown. I feel like the city is a character itself in the book. How did you decide, which landmarks to use? And were there some that didn't make the cut that you maybe wanted to use and couldn't?
Yes. I didn't really decide. Except for the ballerina clown. And in a moment, I'm going to show some pictures of some of these landmarks, because how can you have a giant ballerina clown with a hobo head and not put it into a magical circus? So that was a no-brainer. That was a given. But as I started writing, I just started pulling in so many of the things I love about Venice. And there were some big ones that didn't make it in there. One of the big ones is the Venice sign. The Venice sign's on the cover of the book. Like, the artist, without my even having to say anything, the artist put the Venice sign on the cover, but the Venice sign is not in the book, even though it inspires the marquee. The marquee is inspired by the Venice sign. There's a marquee that lights up for the circus. Also not in there is that beautiful sculpture, the like kind of person-looking sculpture right at the end of Windward. I can't remember. I think the sculpture is called Departures. It's a giant, like 3 or 4 story high sculpture, iron sculpture of kind of a humanoid figure a little bit. And that wasn't there when I first moved to Venice. I watched that go up. And so even though I love that so much, it's kind of, in some ways, I don't always think of it to add it in, even though I think it's been there for 20 years now. But I'd love to show a couple of the pictures of the things around Venice that are in the book or inspired the book. So if we could pop the slides up, that would be great. Okay, so how can you not love a place where there's a trash can decorated welcoming you to Venice? So this is kind of a little short tour of Maddie's Venice. Maddie is the main character in the book. This trash can is not in the book. I happened to be walking down the alley. This is right on Speedway. And I saw this trash can and I thought it sort of was perfect to welcome you to Maddie's Venice. So here we go on to Maddie's Venice. So let's go to the next slide. This is a mural that does not exist anymore. There are so many amazing murals and so much amazing street art around Venice. It's one of the things I love most about it. And this mural used to be on the wall of Jelena on Abbot Kinney. And it's I don't even know what it is. It's this wonderful wolf, unicorn, cheetah. And so this is one of the first murals that Maddie sees as she enters Venice, even though I took some artistic liberty and I put it into a different part of Venice. But this is one of the first ones she sees. So let's go to the next. So for a long time, and I think it's still happening, it sounds like, for so long, walking around Venice, every now and then you would come across one of these stenciled, spray-painted little signs on the sidewalk. This is probably it's probably smaller than the size of my book. They're often small, and I don't know if it was one person doing them or multiple people doing them, but they were all these wonderful little stenciled graffiti pieces on the sidewalk. And these inspired, in the very beginning of the book, words appear on the sidewalk that Maddie sees. And those words, the first phrase is "why not?" And the next phrase is "you are here." And those are inspired by these little pieces of beauty, like you see the beauty here. And the next one is another example of the same thing. "You are perfect because you are." It's a very nice thing to just walk past when you're wandering around Venice. So let's go to the next slide. So this is the Venice Pier. By the way, these are all photos I just pulled from my phone that I've taken around town. I love sunsets. Half of my phone is filled, maybe 2/3 of my phone is filled with sunset pictures. The Venice Pier is one of my favorite places, and sunsets over the water are my favorite thing. I try to walk outside every night at sunset when I'm home to watch the sunset. The pier itself is this long fishing pier, and at the end it opens up into a giant bulb. And if you can see it from, I don't have an aerial view of it, but if you saw it from above, it looks like kind of a keyhole shape. And that round circle at the end always just felt like a stage to me, like you should walk into the middle of that circle and throw your arms out and spin around. So the pier is very important in the book and in the circus. All right. This is my absolute favorite mural in Venice. This is on Abbot Kinney. It's by an artist named Max Neutra, who used to show a lot in a local gallery called Cave on Abbot Kinney. And I I don't understand this mural at all, and I love it so much. I love it so much. And this is, again, one of the first things Maddie sees when she gets off the bus in Venice. There is a mural of a tuxedo with bunnies inexplicably pouring out of its neck. And later on, the bunnies come to life because that's what magical murals do. All right, let's go to the next. This is the one picture I did not take myself because I couldn't find a good angle to take it from, but this is the ballerina clown by an artist named Borofsky. It's been there since I think the 70s, and I love her so much, but so many people I know think this is the creepiest thing they've ever seen in their entire life, including my husband, and like do not even want to ever see it again as long as they live. When they first put her in, you can kind of see the raised leg she has. Her knee is actually moves, and so she stands there and her foot kicks. And they used to play music, but the people who live in those condos right there got very annoyed, and apparently her knee was also very loud, so they stopped doing that. I heard recently they started her up again, and that's very exciting, but it was only just for a little while. So that's the ballerina clown. And this is just a picture of the canals, which, I mean, magical, all by themselves. Venice was originally built, all canals built after Venice, Italy. The whole history of Venice, California is spectacular, and I won't get into it because it's too long, but it is just the most magical history because it was built for amusement and edification, like a circus. So this is just a beautiful shot of the canals. In my book, Maddie spent a decent amount of time in the canals and on those bridges, those little footbridges, which are also just so gorgeous. All right, let's go to next. The Venice art walls and cones. Oh, I love these so much. You can't see the cones in these pictures. They look like kind of concrete wizard hats that are stuck in the sand, but these are continually repainted by different graffiti artists who come here and they schedule. There's a foundation that sort of takes care of these and looks after them. So people are constantly rotating through our different artists and putting gorgeous art on these walls. There's, I think, 2 walls and 3 cones. It used to be a whole enclosed space called the pavilion that was just covered in graffiti, and that came down a long time ago, and this is what's left of the pavilion. And it's just continually changed around. And in the book, there's a scene that takes place inside the art of the graffiti walls, and I just had so much fun writing that scene. And let's go to the next slide. And here's a mural of Abbot Kinney. This is on, I think, South Venice Boulevard. It's on one of the Venices. And this is like a 2 or 3 story high mural. Abbot Kinney is the man who funded and dreamt up Venice, California. And so he kind of always feels like the grandfather of Venice looking over everything. So he is also in the book, or I should say this mural of him is also in the book for a very short amount of time. He just appears and makes things more confusing. And here's another one of my favorites. This is at the end of Washington Boulevard, right over the Venice Whaler. So first of all, I love this mural so much. And second of all, if you can see in the top right there, there's a quote from a Rumi poem that says, "Reach higher, reach for your spirit." And it just makes me happy every time I see that. And this mural, the figure in this mural also steps out of this mural and is a character that shows up later in the novel to help Maddie along her journey. And this is another fabulous mural. This one's right off Windward. This is a remake of a mural by an artist named R. Kronk. This one is also by R. Kronk, as was the second remake. This one is called, I believe, Venice Kinesis. And R. Kronk has done, he's done so many murals all around Venice. And the figure right in the center there, she is the inspiration for a character named Vanessa in the book, who is the muse of Venice, and she comes out of her mural also, and she's kind of the muse of the circus. She inspires the acts of the circus. So this building I threw in here just because it's got such a great history. This is on Windward Circle in Venice, and if you look at the kind of swoops of this building and the curves and how it's done, this building commemorates the spot that used to have a giant roller coaster called the Race Through the Clouds roller coaster. And the Race Through the Clouds roller coaster is, in fact, in my book as well. There's a scene in which Maddie and Skeeter have to race on the roller coaster. This was, I believe, the first racing roller coaster in the United States, meaning there were 2 tracks and people actually raced on the roller coaster. I don't really understand how that works, but this building was put up in the same spot as a way to commemorate it. the architect wanted to kind of hold on to some of the roller coaster feel. All right. And I just threw this one in here too. The top apartment is the apartment I lived in on the Venice canals when I wrote this book. So there's my old Venice apartment with the prayer flags in the front. And the last slide, I just want to leave us with this little note from some magical, wonderful artist who spray painted it somewhere in Venice on the sidewalk, in pursuit of magic, which I feel like is what I always am. All right, that's the last slide.
That was wonderful. That was the best tour that I've had without leaving my seat ever.
Fabulous.
And I loved being able to just see more of the book and see the inspiration. I was wondering, like, what mural did Vanessa come out of? And I'm so glad I got to see that. And especially the roller coaster, the race through the clouds. That's wonderful to be able to see where that inspiration came from the artist to the building and then to your story. To connect it back to Circus at the End of the Sea. And I guess without giving too much away, can you talk a little bit more about the significance, either of those landmarks or the circus as a whole, the heart, the Bridge of Sighs, any of them, or all of them? I want to hear more.
Absolutely. So the circus part is kind of straightforward. I love circuses, but I really love Cirque du Soleil. I am a huge Cirque du Soleil fan. And way back when Cirque du Soleil first came to this country, they set up in the Santa Monica Pier parking lot. And as they were setting up, all of us who used to live there, and like I would skate by all the time because I was always on my rollerblades, and we'd skate by and be like, "What is that? What is that? It looks so magical." And we'd watch them setting it up. To set it up, they'd rappel down the sides of their big top. It was like a show to watch them set up their tent. And it was just such a perfect place for it to be, because even though the Santa Monica Pier is obviously Santa Monica and not Venice, they sort of flow into each other. And to me, Venice is the very best kind of circus like that. It's where people who want to step a little bit outside of the mainstream and do surprising or unusual things with their art, with their way of thinking, with their bodies, with how they work. That's where they go. And it's kind of like the best mythological or fictional circus. It's where all the misfits get together. And so and where you're welcome and where you're at home. And so to me, Venice always is a circus. When I used to go out skating there, or when I do go out skating there, I always say, I'm going to go join the parade. I'll be back in a little while. So that's the circus. The heart. So in the book, there's a literal giant human heart. It's the heart of the circus itself. And the heart is really that part of us that knows who we are. It's the part of us that understands what we need in that moment. And it's the part of us that can be the hardest to listen to. Like, we have to train ourselves sometimes to listen to that piece of ourselves. And then even one step further, not just listen to it, but then do what it says and act on what it's telling us to do. And so the heart is, it's the literal and representational sort of core of things. So that's just very briefly in the book what it is as well. And the Bridge of Sighs, it's those moments where we get to decide, what are we going to believe about ourselves, and what are we going to choose to take forward, and what are we going to leave behind. And so when faced with the things that we are frightened of about ourselves, or when faced with a choice of what do we carry forward from here, we get to choose that. And what do we choose? And that's really what and then with the other piece of it, how do we not only recognize but accept change, and not just changes we don't want, but sometimes accepting changes we do want is hard, or moving away from something that we thought was great to find something that was better. So it's a little bit of all of those things, plus magic.
Magic.
That
leads to the next question, and I love that you already showed a photograph of one of the stencils, graffiti about magic. But can you talk about the role that magic plays in Maddie's life? It's pretty significant.
It's pretty significant. So here's my thing about magic. I feel like it's always there for those of us who look. and I know we have different ways to explain it and describe it, but I feel like it's really easy, especially these days, it's really easy to look around and see the things that are broken and that are painful and that are aggravating and that are ugly. We're a little bit hardwired to see those kinds of things. But to be able to not only see but accept the things that are beautiful and magical and that lighten up the world, that to me is what magic is. And so for Maddie, she can't see it because she's special or different or a chosen one. She sees it because she recognizes she sees it and she loves it and she keeps looking for it. And so to me, the role of magic in her life, I mean, in the book, it's been to kind of let her know she's not alone. But in a bigger picture, the role of magic is that magic is there and we get to decide if we see it or not. And that's how the whole circus works. It's there. We get to choose if we're going to look for that part of things or not. And if we are going to look for that part of things, are we going to let ourselves be swept away by it and delighted by it and believe it's real? So for me, magic is kind of, I'd say it's a stand-in, but anyone who knows me will say that I wouldn't be surprised if I turned a corner and some magical creature jumped out and started talking to me. I'd be like, okay, yeah, this makes sense. But it really is that thing to me. It's like there's this magic in Venice because I love Venice so much. So I see all the magic and beauty there. But any place we love, there's magic everywhere. So any place that we love, any activity we love, any person we love, we're gonna still see that and feel that magic and that spark and that beauty that maybe not everyone else will. And it's not because it's not there when other people don't see it, it's because they don't notice it or choose not to look.
But I love like that fully rounded themes, that recurring duality of magic and wonder, but also part of it, and you mentioned it before, are like the sad parts, and how we really, that those do have to exist to really experience and appreciate that magic and wonder. So we have the themes in the book that also include loneliness, abandonment, and then counteracting that, hope and acceptance. With all of that going on, what would you hope is the number one takeaway that a young person could get from reading this book?
Yeah, it's funny. My answer will probably change to this every time I'm asked, like from day to day. But what I would say right now is just the recognition that there are certain things we're all born into. There are things we have no control over. Our parents, we don't choose them. I mean, some schools of thought, I guess, say we do, but we don't choose our parents. We don't choose where we're born. We don't choose a lot of things that happen to us in our lives. But what we can do is choose who we become in the face of those. And so to me, I think it always comes back to the reminder that we get to choose, that to recognize the things we get to choose, to know what we can choose, to take the things that make us who we are, that are the person that we most want to be or most truly feel that we are, and be able to take those things and move through our lives. And so what I would hope, I think, mostly, I just hope they have a great time with it and love the book. But if they're going to take a lesson away, I would hope that the sense of nothing, it's not preordained. And you don't get to be a chosen one or not be a chosen one. We get to choose these things. We get to choose. And even though the cards in the hand we're dealt might be really different and really could be really hard and really bad, there are still places within that we get to choose. And so how do we do that? So it's like this, hopefully they will walk away with a sense of feeling more empowered in their own selves.
I loved that. I loved one of my favorite parts of it was when Maddie embraced all of who she was, the good and the bad. That was that spoke to me, and I think that would have spoke to me as well as a young person. So I wanted to ask. There are some characters that seem oh so familiar from the Venice boardwalk. Were any of the characters based off of real people in Venice?
Oh, yes. It's funny because I started to write down all the ones that were real because I was going to put them all in the author note. And I just got to a point where I'm like, no, I'll just like, there's too many. So quite a few of them are based on real people. The man with the snakes, he was a he was a regular on the boardwalk, and he was wonderful, and he was always at the top of the ladder with the snakes, and he is a real person in the book. The tree man that shows up in the nighttime circus, I don't know if any of you have ever seen the tree man that wanders around Venice, but he's dressed in this fabulous, full-on, beautiful, kind of creepy tree costume, and he's on stilts, so he's like, I don't know, 8 feet tall, and he is so committed to being in character, and he wanders not just on the boardwalk and not just during the day, he wanders all around the city. One time I was in a restaurant on Main Street, and he walked down and stuck his head in the window on Main Street, fully in character with his branches extended, looked around, and then left. So the tree man is in the nighttime circus, and he is very real. There are people, obviously, that come out of the murals. I'm like, I should look at my notes for this one, because I'm like, oh, who else is real? Let's see. Oh yeah, the chainsaw juggler. There isn't a chainsaw juggler on the boardwalk anymore, but there used to be several chainsaw jugglers. So Adela, who's the chainsaw juggler, is based on them. The drum circle, of course. I can't remember, honestly, if in this draft I did have to take some people out, if the man on a unicycle with his hair gelled into 2 horns and flame tattoos up his legs are in this book, but he is actually real also. So I used to see him all the time on the boardwalk.
Okay, before I ask my planned question, I noticed in the comments we have a question from Colin Justice. So that works well as we move from talking about characters based on real people to a beloved and very important animal character in this book. So Lori, could you please talk about how Ophelia came into being and her role?
Yes. So Ophelia is a mimic octopus who becomes sort of Maddie's best friend in the book. And mimic octopuses are real things. They actually exist in the world, but unlike Ophelia in my book, they cannot turn into things like skateboards or hairbrushes or things like that. But they do mimic other animals and look very much like other animals in the wild to fool predators or to sneak up on things or to hide. So because I have a former career as a marine biologist, and that is still one of my great loves, I have a favorite invertebrate, which is the octopus, because they're amazing. And so when I started writing this book, I knew there would be an octopus in it somewhere. I had no idea what that octopus would be like, but I knew there had to be an octopus. And when Ophelia showed up, she just sort of showed up when I was writing this. She showed up when Maddie needed to be saved from falling in the water, and then she just turned into a skateboard. And I was like, well, I guess she's a mimic octopus. She's turning into a skateboard, so there you go. And she sort of grew from there, and it was so much fun to write her and figure out all the things she was going to turn into. On another side note, again, because I was a marine biologist, I have not only a favorite invertebrate, but I have a favorite fish, which is the mola mola, the ocean sunfish. And in many previous iterations of this book, there was a scene with a mola mola, which ended up sadly on the cutting room floor in the final draft, which was the right choice for the book. But I was so attached to that mola, so hopefully that will show up in another book somewhere.
Oh, thank you. I loved how all of your past careers made its way somehow into the story. The book itself, like we mentioned, this is a love letter to Venice, and you just captured the feel of Venice Beach so perfectly. So a little bit more, I mean, you've been talking about how Venice has influenced and shaped you as a person and as a writer, but can you tell us a little bit more about that? Dive into that a little bit more?
Absolutely. I first moved to Venice in 1990, but before that, I grew up in the Valley. I'm an LA native. Before that, I was driving over the hill pretty much every weekend to spend my weekends in Venice with my musician friends that I met on the boardwalk, who lived, 6 people in a little 1-bedroom on Rose Avenue. And I just loved it. And so when I was looking for yet another apartment, I bounced around to a lot of apartments when I was, before I moved to Venice, with lots of different roommates. And it had never really occurred to me that actual real people might live in Venice. And back then, it wasn't really any more expensive than living in the Valley. And so I had this giant light bulb moment where I could live in Venice. And so when I found my apartment, the day I moved in with some friends helping me move in, I was just home. It's like I got there and I'm like, I'm home. This is it. And so that sense of being in the right place is hugely, it's just such an amazing, grounding, comforting, exhilarating place to be when you're like, this is where I belong. And so it really let me make all these choices in my life that didn't look like what other choices other people were making, basically. That let me try out all these things and be who I needed to be and figure out who I was going to be. Because I think I was 22 when I first moved there. And so figure out who I was going to be as an adult. And a funny story that I often tell is I love Venice so much that in 2011 I had moved away earlier to Northern California, and I was so homesick I came back to Venice after about almost 9 years. And I got to Venice and I was like, this is the best love affair of my life. Like, Venice is the best love affair of my life. So I'm just going to buy myself a ring. I'm going to marry myself to Venice because that sounds awesome. so I was actually looking for a ring. I was going to register somewhere in Venice. I was going to have a big party. I'm going to be like, that's it. I'm marrying Venice. And then I met my now husband, who I loved dearly and was totally worth the trade-off. But I'm like, oh, I guess I can't marry both. But I was ready. I was ready to marry Venice.
That's such a great story. I love it. And it's such a special place. Can you tell us, did you hide any secret Easter eggs in your story that only a few people will find?
I did. So a couple of them nobody but me is going to get, but I totally cracked myself up putting them in. I have a couple little homages and bows to the movie Lilo and Stitch, which I love immensely in there. Like, there's a couple little things where, again, you kind of have to be in my brain to know that's what they are, I think. But if anyone wants to know, I will tell you later because there's spoilers a little bit. And then there is also, there's a nod to Neil Gaiman's Coraline. There's a nod to Kat Valenti's Fairyland books, which I love, The Girl Who Circumnavigated Fairyland in a Ship of Her Own Making, and so on from those books. There's a nod to The Phantom Tollbooth, which was my all-time favorite book when I was a kid. And there's also a nod. So George Saunders, a while back, wrote this very odd little book called The Very Persistent Gappers of Fripp. It was illustrated by Lane Smith. It's not for kids, sort of, but it's not really for adults. It's like this very weird sort of illustrated tiny little book. I wish I had it handy to show you, but I don't. I love this book so much. Like, I love this book so much, and it delights me no end. And so gappers, which are kind of an animal in the book, gappers show up in my book in an unexpected place. And I think there's maybe two people. I think there are, in fact, two people I know, one of whom was Colin, who just asked that question, who know about this. And it was very exciting to me when my friend Colin, who was one of the two people, just called me and said, are there gappers in your book? And I'm like, there are gappers in my book. So there are gappers in my book. And I have this like dream that I'm going to send a copy to George Saunders and be like, I'm very sorry what I did with your gappers, but I thought you might want to see. So I might do that.
I love it. I love it. I'm noticing there's another comment. Let's see here. B Brown Books wants to know, will there be a sequel?
Not at the moment. Right now it's a standalone. I don't have a sequel planned. We don't have one planned with the publisher, but things are funny. You never know.
You never know. What are some of the questions that you get from your readers, and how do they contact you? Do your fans reach out on social media or email?
So the book is pretty new still. And so I actually just got my first letter, actual letter, like snail mail letter from a reader this last week, which was amazing. And before that, it's really only been like adults I know who told me about their children I don't know loving it, or someone they had given to loving it. And so I'm just starting to get those kinds of things, which is so cool. I am on social media, but I don't go there very often. So if someone does contact me on social media, I will see it, but I won't see it right away. So mostly I assume I have a PO box on my website and I have my email on my website. I'm going to assume that it will be mostly through those, but it was very exciting to get a letter from somebody who loved the book and drew a maze for me of Maddie looking for Ophelia, which was the cutest thing ever.
Okay, we're going to pull from your past backgrounds, but it seems like education and telling stories has been consistent throughout. On that realm, are there any words of wisdom that you can offer young creative minds or other aspiring artists?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is if there's something that is calling to you to do that you love doing, do that thing. And we live in a culture where, especially as you get older, you're probably going to hear all the reasons you shouldn't do that thing, and you're going to hear all the ways in which you should be doing other things that are more practical or make you money or not, do something else for you. But I so believe that art and creativity are the most important, some of the most important things there are. Like art is, whether you just do it for yourself or you do it and you want an audience for it, whatever it is one of the most meaningful ways that we connect as humans. And it changes people. It changes us when we do it. It changes people when we share it with them. And so if there's something that you love doing, hang on to that. Hang on to it and keep doing it, even if it takes you 20 something years to get a book published like it did me. I hope it doesn't if you want to write books, but if it does, just keep going. Just keep going. I mean, it's going to open up avenues and doors that you couldn't imagine. But even more important than that, it's going to be your own foundation and joy and beauty and meaning. And that's one of the most important things there is.
Okay, I have to ask, what are you reading now and what's on your must-read list?
So I'm sure like a lot of us, I have piles of reading. I'm like reading tons of books at the same time. And interestingly enough, I'm not at this particular moment reading any middle grade, which I think is partly because I'm writing my next book. And sometimes when I'm writing middle grade, I'm not reading a whole lot of it. I sort of go in cycles. But I grabbed a couple things that I'm loving right now that I can actually show you. Oh my gosh, this book is so fun. Light from Uncommon Stars by Rika Aoki. So this is a book. Here's what I'll tell you about this book. It's fiction. I think it's adult, but it could be YA. It's like one of those kind of crossover books. I think she's a local LA author. I know she's had done stuff with Beyond Baroque, so she might even be local Venice. I'm not sure. But it is about 3 characters. One of them is a trans girl who has run away from her family, and she's a violinist, and she has taken only her violin with her, and she's very talented. Number 2, a very, very famous violin teacher who has sold her soul to the devil, and in exchange for her soul back has promised to deliver 7 other violinist souls. She has a set deadline for this. She's delivered 6 of them, and she needs 1 more. And the third person is a intergalactic space captain who has escaped an intergalactic war or a galactic war where she's from with her whole family to come to Earth, where they now own one of the donut shops that has one of those iconic big donut as a sign, like Randy's Donuts. They own one of those. And it's these 3 characters and how they all come together. It is really fun. So I highly recommend that. And then the other book that I'm reading right now, Thich Nhat Hanh, who just passed away this last week, Zen and the Art of Saving the Planet, which is collections of his essays and talks, and also commentary by some of his longtime students. So those are 2 of the many, many books I'm reading at the moment. And then the other question was what I'm excited about reading. Is that also the other question?
Yes.
So there's a couple books from fellow debut authors this year that I haven't gotten to yet that I'm so excited for. One is Cici Rios and the Desert of Souls, which I haven't read yet. That is by Kayla Rivera, and I love the premise of it. It's a fantasy, also a middle grade fantasy. And the other is a book called Unsettled by Reem Faruqi, which I also haven't read yet, which is a middle grade, I believe, contemporary. And both of those are like the next 2 on my middle grade read list.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm going to skip to our last question because it is related. You did mention you were working on another middle grade novel. Can you talk a little about that or anything else, or what's coming up next? What's coming up next for Lori? What's next?
So yes, I am working on another middle grade novel. Right now it's scheduled to come out also with HarperCollins. It's scheduled to come out in summer of 2023. I'm not sure I'm going to make that deadline, so it might be fall of 23. Hope my editor is not watching. But not that it will surprise her. But it is another middle grade fantasy. It is not a sequel. It is not in the same world or related at all. But it is a middle grade fantasy that is. It's about a girl named Zephyr who accidentally wakes up the winter wind, and together they go on this adventure where they have to literally save time. So that's the one that's coming up next. And it had a title, which I mean, who knows if it'll stay the title, but in the latest revision, the thing the title referred to is no longer there, I don't think. So now I think it needs a whole new title. So I won't even tell you what the working title was.
We will look out for it no matter what. That sounds very exciting.
Thank you.
Okay, now it's time for Your Authored Standard, our rapid-fired questions that we call this or that. So this is just for fun, allows us to learn a little bit more about you. And we put a theme to our this or that. So your theme is going to be circus or the sea. So something that has to do with one or the other. We're going to ask you really quickly, and you tell us which one you prefer. Are you ready?
All right. I'm ready.
All right. You ready? Okay. Marina or marquee?
Oh, marquee.
Ooh. Big top or beach?
Beach.
Skateboard or surfboard?
Oh, geez. Surfboard.
I feel like, but why? I want to ask the follow-up questions, but that's not rapid fire. Okay. All right. Sand or sawdust?
Oh, sand. That's a hard one. That's a really good one. That was a really good one.
Clown or clownfish?
Clownfish. Sorry, got to go with the clownfish. They're awesome.
All right. And our final one, we have under the sea or under the stars?
Oh, how do you choose one? All right, I'm going to say under the stars right now, even though they're really tied. They're both amazing.
That's great. And actually, that's perfect because that allows us to wish everyone, I think it's dark now, for the rest of the night, a wonderful night under the stars. Hopefully, at one point, you'll be under the stars reading this book because it'll be perfect atmosphere to do that in. And we just wanted to thank you so much, Lori, for sharing your process and more about what made Circus at the End of the Sea come to be. It was absolutely lovely and magical. Thank you so much.
It really
thank you, Janet.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Danielle. This was fantastic. Thanks for having me here. I'm really grateful. And I'm a huge fan of the library. Like I said, love it to death.
Please come by the next time you're in Venice.
Yes.
I definitely will.
Okay, great.
Thank you so much, Lori. And thank you all for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed this conversation with author Lori R Snyder. Remember to visit lapl.org to read more books in 2022. Like we had in our comments, our next Your Author program is set for February 18th, and it's going to be with Misty Copeland. That's going to be a wonderful program. I hope to see you there. And I'd like to end by expressing how much we appreciate your support. The success of all our library programs cannot happen without viewers like you. So thank you. Have a wonderful rest of your evening and wonderful weekend, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.